They say humiliation echoes longer than applause. I stood in Crestwell Consulting's largest conference room, the air thick with burnt coffee and tension. On the oak table before me gleamed a brass nameplate, Margaret Hill, Director. HR had ordered it 2 weeks earlier. A quiet promise that 12 years of 60-hour weeks finally meant recognition. Victor, our freshly minted vice president, barely 35 and already drunk on slogans, shattered it in a single sentence. The new director of operations, he declared, voice slick with false cheer, will be Jason Myers. We're committed to younger, more dynamic leadership. The applause that followed was uneven, hesitant, the sound of people clapping at a funeral. Jason, still smelling faintly of campus laundry, grinned like a lottery winner. 18 months at Crestwell, and the brass plate was slid away from me as if clearing crumbs from the table, replaced with a flimsy piece of plastic bearing his name. Eyes darted toward me, then quickly away, as if humiliation might be contagious. My cheeks burned, but my spine didn't bend. I was Margaret Hill, 38, senior project manager, the one who had rescued contracts worth millions when everyone else floundered. And staring at the empty space where my name had been, I knew 2 things. They thought I would swallow this. They were wrong. I didn't leave the room in a fury. I've never been fireworks. I'm a pilot light. I stayed until the last slide faded and the catering trays curled into themselves, the way aluminum does when the heat leaves. Victor floated from cluster to cluster, slick as a brochure, shaking hands with people who had learned to keep their faces bland. Jason wandered in an orbit of congratulations, clapping shoulders like he'd just landed on the moon. I packed my notebook, tucked the brass plate into the empty box they'd brought the plastic one in, and walked back to my desk past rows of hushed faces and screensaver constellations. The office smells different after a public demotion. Antiseptic. People move softer. My keyboard sounded like someone else's keyboard when I touched it. Tinny, a little cruel. I opened the Finch Healthcare folder I had lived inside for 6 months and watched the file tree breathe. Risk matrices, staff plans, the burn-up chart no one else understood. I clicked through until I reached the spreadsheet that had eaten my weekends and squinted at a cell reference that had once been a mystery and now looked like a map I could fold. With my eyes closed, my father used to say, "Ugly as rebar, kid, but it keeps the building up." He didn't say it like an insult. He said it like a benediction. He'd worked commercial slabs for 3 decades, and when he died, his hands stayed in my memory, cracked and square, like the backs of legal pads. I learned to love the ugly work early. At 26, I hadn't been dynamic either. I was reliable. It's a word that sounds like a kindness and lands like a thumbtack. You don't make posters about reliable. Reliable doesn't get a corner office. Reliable holds the ladder so someone else can climb. That night I stayed late because there was still work. The Finch team expected a revised timeline by morning, and the Dallas client, $1.8 million in revenue saved last winter by a weekend spent building a schedule from scratch in a Marriott lobby, wanted a margin report. I rode until the building emptied and the cleaning crew's vacuums hummed like far-off cicadas. At 11:32 p.m., I opened the email. The subject was harmless, brand refresh guidance. It was a thread between Victor and HR that I wasn't supposed to be on, courtesy of a reply-all habit I had warned him about twice. If we're refreshing our brand, we can't promote people like Margaret, he wrote. Reliable, yes, but not the youthful face we want. Jason photographs well. Optics matter. People like Margaret. It read like a diagnosis. I took a breath and copied the thread into my evidence folder because that's the kind of woman I am. 2 tabs over, a draft version of the Finch contract had my stomach go cold. Lead manager, Jason Myers. I scrolled, looking for my name like I might find it tucked under a couch cushion. Support staff M. Hill, that wasn't oversight. That was choreography. I shut the laptop and felt the hum of the building settle into the soles of my shoes. I drove home with the radio off. The road's empty in that way. City roads are after midnight, a little lawless, as if anyone still awake must already know what they're doing. My husband, Mark, was sitting at the kitchen table with a glass of red and his reading glasses on his head like a crooked diadem. He has a teacher's patience and a firefighter's shoulders. I told him what happened while I made tea I didn't drink. When I finished, he didn't say, "Quit." He didn't say, "Sue." He tipped his glass toward me and said, "You don't need revenge. Just correction." I laughed once, sharp and small. "Sometimes they're synonyms." He grinned like he'd gotten an answer right. "Then show them the dictionary." I slept badly, the kind of sleep where you dream that you're arguing with an elevator and wake with your jaw sore. By morning, my anger had cooled into a slab of something weight-bearing. Micro-message number 1. Workhorses stay invisible until the cart breaks. I texted Denise a single sentence. Need 10 minutes near the vending machine at noon. She's one of those colleagues who has earned the right to speak plainly. 10 years older than me, a memory like a filing cabinet, and a sense for the temperature of a room that could make a weatherman jealous. At 12:03, we leaned against the humming machine with its crinkled potato chip options lit like stained glass. "They'll call it a refresh," she said. No preamble. The way you tell someone there's spinach in their teeth. "You're not a refresh, Margaret. You're the infrastructure. You're the part they never take pictures of." "Optics," I said, and watched the word curdle. She sighed. "You know who cares about optics less than anyone? A CFO whose quarterly bonus depends on deliverables, or a client who knows what it feels like to have their payroll on the line." "I have a client like that," I said. "Finch." She nodded as if that had been inevitable. "Then get your sunlight there. Don't give Victor a private problem. Give the board a public one." I spent my lunch break printing everything that was already mine. Emails sent at lunatic hours, comments threads where I'd bled corrections into Jason's lead drafts, call logs with Finch and his head of ops. I compiled it the way an engineer pours a foundation. Steel first, then the pour, then the cure. At 3:17 p.m., my phone lit up with Robert Finch's number. His voice is gravel and iron filings and a little bit of Illinois cornfield. "I just read this draft contract," he said without hello. "Why the hell is a child listed as lead on work you did?" "You noticed," I said. "I'm old, not blind. I won't sign unless your name's on top." I heard ice clink in a glass somewhere on his end of the line. "I have enough mascots in my life, Margaret. I hire mechanics. What are we going to do?" "We're going to correct the record," I said. And he made the kind of approving noise you can pour into a tired body like coffee. We met the next morning at a diner that still smelled faintly of cigarettes burrowed into the upholstery from a decade ago. He wore a suit that fit his shoulders like the memory of a farm coat. "This isn't charity," he said after the second sip of his coffee. "It's arithmetic. You've saved me from 3 expensive mistakes. If they don't give you the title, they don't get the money." "Then let's make sure the arithmetic is visible," I said. He nodded once. "Town hall is Friday. I can be a bad connection on a good Wi-Fi." I spent Thursday in a kind of quiet that would have looked like calm from the outside. Inside, each thought slotted into the next. Get the email thread with Victor on letterhead with timestamps. Extract the track changes from the Finch draft. Screen capture the midnight corrections. Print a one-pager with the key dates. Load everything onto a USB the size of a fingernail. Clean it. Label it. Tuck it into the inner pocket of my blazer like a talisman. That night, at our kitchen table, Mark poured 2 fingers of the good bourbon we save for things that change the shape of a week. "You ready?" he asked. I thought about my father's square hands and Denise's plain words and Finch's arithmetic and the brass plate in the box under my desk. "I am," I said, and the sentence felt like the click of a seatbelt before takeoff. Friday tasted metallic. I wore navy and a silk blouse the color of good copy paper. My shoes were the pair I wore to funerals and promotions because the thing with leather is it remembers the weight of you, and I needed something in the room to remember that I had stood firm on other days. The town hall filled with 100 employees and 3 board members who sat in front like jurors. Victor worked the crowd. Jason practiced not looking like he was practicing looking confident. Victor started with numbers so large they might as well be latitude and tried to drape them over Jason like a cape. Our new director of operations, Jason Myers, has spearheaded our most lucrative project yet, the $2.4 million Finch healthcare contract. There was that thin applause again. My hands stayed still. I didn't raise them to speak. I stood. With respect, I said, feeling the word do the work of a crowbar. That's false. The room didn't breathe for a second. Victor tried to cut a ribbon in the air with his palm. This isn't the time, Margaret. It is exactly the time, I said, and took the USB from my pocket. I wasn't dramatic when I plugged it in. I was methodical. Slide 1. The project timeline with my initials threaded through deliverables like the spine through a fish. Slide 2. A screen capture of a pivot table I had rebuilt from Jason's exploded attempt, the timestamp 1:13 a.m., my correction notes green and relentless. Slide 3. Email headers with Finch's team, the ones where the subject lines got longer and more exasperated until we started joking that we should switch to semaphore. Slide 4. The draft contract with lead manager Jason Myers and the comment thread where I had told legal, in 4 precise sentences, why that was non-compliant with our own policy. Murmurs bloom fast in rooms like that. They move like heat. Denise's single clap cracked the air and then dissolved into 100 voices. Someone whispered Jesus like a prayer, and someone else said it like a swear. Then the screen split, and Finch's face filled half of it from his office in a building that used to house a piano factory. I don't do business with mascots, he said as promised, voice like a boot on gravel. If Margaret isn't director, Crestwell doesn't get a dime. It's a strange experience watching an entire room do math at once. You can feel the mental beads slide on the invisible abacus. 2.4 million, minus what, plus who? Victor's jaw tightened in a way that looked like a press photo if you didn't know him. Jason's ears turned the color of an ulcer. Senior staff mentor juniors, I said, clear enough to carry to the back of the room. But their names stay on their work. Starting today, we publish quarterly attribution reports. Every contract above $1 million gets a lead of record and that person presents. No more smoke and mirrors. A board member lifted her pen. And if leadership resists? Finch's laugh was a single syllable. Leadership can resist their way into a lost contract. The chair, a woman who had built 2 companies out of the kind of insomnia I recognize, worked the inside of her cheek with her tongue and then said, "Draft the policy." "It stands," I sat. My heart did what it always does after a fire drill. Thud once, then behave. Victor made a noise like a zipper catching. Jason stared at his nameplate with the delicate focus of a man trying not to vomit on his shoes. Micro-message number 2. When they steal your work, they also steal their own credibility. The audit wasn't vindictive. I requested it with language I'd use to order office chairs. To ensure compliance with revised attribution policy, I recommend an internal review of deliverables for FY-to-date contracts above $1. It turns out when you say it like that, people say yes without looking for a trap. The auditors came in 2 days later with laptops that looked like they had been built to survive a war zone, and eyes that had seen every flavor of corporate fudge. I walked them through the Finch project with the slow, careful patience I use when teaching a junior how to fix a circular reference. We compared sent items to final drafts. We overlaid calendar entries with revision saves. We followed the breadcrumb trail I had been laying, mostly out of habit, for months. 78% of deliverables authored by M. Hill, one auditor said flatly on day 3 scrolling. 17% by unassigned team edits, which on metadata review also traced back to M. Hill, 5% by J. Myers, 2 of which were later overwritten by, guess who, M. Hill. In the conference room that afternoon, Jason tried to explain a budget model. It was like watching a man stumble down a staircase he had insisted was an escalator. Who built it? The auditor asked, eyes kind. Jason swallowed. I collaborated. Collaboration doesn't erase authorship, the auditor said. Not unkindly, and made a note. Victor kept saying, team effort, like it was a charm that could turn concrete back into wet cement. The auditors nodded and wrote team effort down and then asked him where his initials were on the drafts. He stopped saying it. The report was done by Friday at 4, because people like us believe in tidy endings to work weeks when we can manufacture them. Attribution Variance Summary, Finch Healthcare Contract. Lead of Record Contributor, Hill M. 78%. The Dallas contract got a page of its own, because apparently someone had been tempted to revisit history there too. I watched the percent sign beside my name settle into the paper like an anchor. At 5:12 p.m., the organizational update email went out. The subject line was boring on purpose. I read it twice anyway. Effective immediately, Margaret Hill is promoted to Director of Operations. Attribution records updated. Compliance enforced company-wide. We thank Ms. Hill for her exceptional leadership. No apology. No speech, just correction the way Mark had said. I printed it and taped it inside the Finch binder, because I'm sentimental about the wrong things and ruthless about the ones that matter. The office moves differently. When truth sits in the lobby like a sculpture, no one can pretend not to see. People who hadn't made eye contact with me on Tuesday walked past my desk and did a small, awkward nod that meant I saw. Denise appeared in my doorway with a smile that looked like satisfaction seasoned by 30 years of waiting her turn. "About time," she said. "Now make it count." I did, because that's what I know how to do. I wrote the policy like an engineer writes a brace. Simple, load-bearing, impossible to decoratively remove without everything collapsing. Attribution and Presentation Policy, Contracts, HRAW, 1 netter, Lead of Record Definition, Mentorship versus Ghostwriting. Quarterly, Publication and Audit Hooks. External Presentation. Rule. I sent it to legal and watched. Then bless it with the solemnity of a liturgy. When HR brought me the new brass plate on Monday, they tried to make it a ceremony. I didn't mind. There's a softness to being acknowledged that I had trained myself not to want. The plate was the same weight as the first one, which is how justice often feels. Identical on paper, different in the hand. I ran my thumb over the letters the way you press a bruise to be sure it's real. Director of Operations, it read, and below it my name again, intact. I set it on my desk and looked at it for a long moment, not because I thought it might disappear if I blinked, but because I wanted to understand the geometry of this new room with this new weight in it. Then I put the plate where it belonged and opened my laptop, because contracts don't sign themselves and cultures don't heal by email. Micromessage number 3. Respect isn't gifted. It's enforced. Jason avoided me for a week, which I accepted as grace for both of us. When he finally knocked on my door, he looked like a man who had slept in the guest room of his own life. "I'm sorry," he said, and sounded like he meant the part that was convenient. I got excited. "You got promoted into my work," I said, calm as a posture correction. "That's not excitement. That's theft. You can fix it, or you can leave," he flinched. "What does fixing it look like?" "It looks like this," I said, and slid a mentoring plan across the desk like a bill. "You're smart, but you're untrained. You will not present alone for 6 months. You will author your own drafts. Your calendar will match your commits. And when you don't know, you will say, 'I don't know' out loud." He swallowed. "And Victor, worry about your own verbs," I said. He nodded and left. He hasn't called me Margaret since. He says director like the word tastes like aluminum, which is how corrective language should taste for a while. Victor kept his title, for the time being, because corporations are slow-blooded creatures and boards prefer the steady thrum of revenue to righteous purge. But his emails began to read like he was writing to a mirror. The part of him that performed for optics now reflected back a woman who could do arithmetic on a screen in front of 100 people. He started adding me to things he thought I'd want to be on. I started responding when it served the work. Finch came by the following Wednesday with a bag of pastries from a bakery that takes itself too seriously. He put them on my conference table like an offering and said, "Never bet against the one who knows where the screws go." "Glad you like the new policy," I said. "I like anything that tells the truth out loud," he said. "Saves me money." I began to watch something shift in the office that had nothing to do with me and everything to do with gravity. Juniors started asking questions in meetings where they used to try to look decorative. People credited each other without clearing their throats. Denise ran a mentorship session and put her name on the first slide in 36-point font, and on the last one in 36-point font, and on each example in 12-point footers because symbolism works better when it repeats. On a Thursday a month later, the board held a quarterly review and asked me to present a segment on the new policy's early effects. I wore the navy again and told the story with numbers because numbers have a way of making story look like strategy. Attribution accuracy improved from an estimated 61% to 93% in Q1, I said, and watched an eyebrow lift. Average junior to senior lead time shortened by 22% because people could ask for help without stealth. Client satisfaction up 5 points. There was a murmur that sounded like respect trying to clear its throat. Afterward, in the hall outside the boardroom where the air conditioning always forgets who it's for, the chair stopped me. I underestimated how psychological policy can be, she said. It's a handrail, I said. People do better when they can see where to put their hands. That night, I brought the brass plate home and set it on our kitchen table like I was introducing a friend to a room. Mark lit a candle because he's sentimental in the ways that make rooms feel like rooms. He lifted his glass and we touched them to the plate and he said simply, "Justice." It didn't feel like fire. It felt like a level finally finding its bubble. I slept well for the first time in weeks with my back relaxing into the kind of rest you earn by refusing to lie down. I'd like to say Victor learned something that lasted. People do sometimes. Mostly he learned proximity. He learned to stand a little farther back from the microphone when he lied. He learned to see fewer people. He learned that there were now auditors who enjoyed their jobs. He learned that optics can glow too bright and show your fingerprints. He did not learn to love the ugly work. I don't think that's something you can staple in later. Jason got better. It's not a miracle story. It's a practice story. He wrote a budget model one Tuesday that didn't leak from the bottom. He admitted out loud in a meeting with a client and 2 managers that he didn't understand a piece of regulatory math, and then he booked an extra hour with me to learn it. His face turned less red when he had to hold silence. He started to sound like a person who might one day be a good manager on purpose. There was a morning in late spring when I stood at my office window, the blinds sifting the light into bands, and watched the junior team from strategy eat bagels on the steps, because the kitchen was out of clean mugs. They were teasing each other in the way people do when they trust the floor not to give way. For the first time since I could remember, I didn't feel like scaffolding. I felt like a beam. Later that week, HR asked me to speak on a panel about women in leadership, which is the corporate equivalent of being asked to set your own arm and then lecture on first aid. I said yes on 2 conditions. I would choose the moderator and we would talk about policy, not personality. When they agreed, I sent an email to an attorney I knew who could say Title VII like a bedtime story, and we built an hour around the fact that culture is a series of levers, not a mood. I tell you this not because I want you to think I became an evangelist for something I never needed. I tell you because people believe change must be grand to be real. Grand is useful. Public is essential. But the change that holds is the one you can write down, audit, and teach. Someone asked during Q&A what I would say to my younger self. The answer came like a reflex. Nothing, I said. She would have ignored me. I would put my name on her work sooner. There were missteps. There are always missteps. I caught myself once, in a meeting with a junior who could have been my niece, using the word obvious about a knot of logic it had taken me 8 years to untie. I saw her shoulders fold in by a centimeter and felt the echo of rooms I had stood in. I stopped. "I'm sorry," I said out loud in front of the room. "Nothing about this is obvious. Let's take it from the top." After the meeting, she lingered. "Thank you," she said, which is what gratitude sounds like when it doesn't know yet how to trust the floor. "Do me a favor," I said. "If you ever hear me do that again, say my name the way a mom says it when you're about to stick a fork in an outlet." She laughed. "Margaret," I smiled. "Exactly." By summer, the policy had done what good braces do, become part of the building. People forgot it was new. They followed it because it made the work easier. They referenced it without opening the PDF. We lost fewer people to the slow attrition that comes from being turned into scaffolding. We made money the way companies like ours do when they stop treating talent like wallpaper. Every once in a while, I open the drawer where the first brass plate sits, the one that almost lived forever under Jason's fluorescent plaque, and I touch its cool edge. Not because I need to remind myself of humiliation. Humiliation is a tattoo you can feel with your fingertips whenever you like, but because objects have a way of keeping time. This one measures the distance between a man's idea of optics and a room full of people watching numbers change. If you want me to say I forgave Victor, I can't give you that ribbon. I don't collect them anymore. What I have is cleaner. A workspace where attribution is a noun, not a plea. A young manager who learned his job the long way. A client who calls me director, like it's my surname. And a nameplate that fits my desk the way my father's hands fit memory, square. Sturdy, not pretty, permanent. On the anniversary of the town hall, Denise came into my office with a cupcake and a single candle, and the kind of smile that is only possible after your jaw has held a line for a very long time. Speech, she said. I thought about being 38 and being told I was the wrong shape of a face for a brand. I thought about the midnight email and the diner coffee and the way a room full of people did math. I thought about Mark's glass tapping brass and how the word justice can sound like a gavel or a blessing depending on who says it. I don't have one, I said. Let's go check the audit hooks. She laughed, and then she followed me down the hall. At the end of the day, I switched off the lamp, and the last light caught the nameplate so that for a moment the letters looked like they were cut out of the dark itself. I locked the door and stood in the corridor listening to the soft machinery of an office closing itself for the night. It sounded like steadiness. It sounded like the building wasn't going anywhere. If you've ever had your name slid out from under your own work and replaced with plastic, hear me. The cart will break. When it does, hold your ground. Bring receipts. Talk calmly into the microphone. Put your hands where people can see them. Teach the policy, audit it. And when they finally hand you the brass you earned, run your fingers over your name like you're reading it in Braille. Not luck. Not gift. Correction. Call to action. If your nameplate's ever been stolen, or your credit handed to someone else, subscribe to Office Revenge Files. Here, names go back where they belong.